Okay, we are here today at the Taneytown History Museum, located at 340 East Baltimore Street in Taneytown, and the date is March 10th, 2018. We're here with Louella Sauble Harner, and she's going to share with us her memories of Saubles Inn. My name is Peggy Flegel-Keeney, and I'm a volunteer here at the History Museum. The location of the Saubles Inn, which is going to be the subject of today, is on the west side of town. It's located on West Baltimore Street on the corner of Harney Road and West Baltimore. Large house there, and it actually has been there a long time. We don't know when the house was built, but it has been a farm there since the Revolutionary War days. So I'm going to tell a little bit about the past history of the farm before the Saubles bought it. They bought it in 1912, so prior to that, like I said, we're going back to the Revolutionary War times. And Rudolph Crabster and Amelia Crabster bought it. They have record of it in 1777. And it was about a 100-acre farm then. The family came from the Netherlands, and they did own the farm up into the 1800s. It was still in the Crabster family. And interestingly enough, they used it as a tavern and a boarding house. So I found that to be interesting, since your grandparents decided to do the same thing. Back then, Harney Road was the main road to Gettysburg. So that was a good location, also a good location because the Emmitsburg Road was the main road to Emmitsburg and Pennsylvania. So it was a good location for them to have a tavern there. This information comes from Basil Crabster's papers, which he wrote. He was a professor of history at Gettysburg College, and he wrote about his family history. Probably around the 1970s or so, he wrote papers about this. He was the fourth great-grandson of Rudolph Crabster. And these papers are for anyone to look at and read that's interested. They're housed at the Historical Society of Carroll County in Westminster. So now we're up to the mid-1800s, and Dr. Samuel Swope, who was a physician here in town for 50 years, bought the property, he and his wife. So another important event happened near that time. July 1st, 1863, we're into Civil War times now. And the Union troops actually rested or stayed or camped, I don't know, I think the term they used was rested, on the Swope property. So I think maybe it probably was across the road, maybe where Memorial Park is now.
Yes.
Probably in that field. They camped maybe overnight, and before their march the next day to Gettysburg. So then they had the battle, and Dr. Swope went to Gettysburg and helped the wounded and the dying. So he was an important figure in history, I think. Next we have the Swope family owned it up until 1900. So all the later 1800s, the Swope family was there. So 1900 to 1912, Ed Rindolph owned it, and he was very beneficial to Taneytown. He had the Rindolph Company Mill, which was located near the railroad. He also was the founder of the Burney Trust Company Bank, and he had other businesses in town. So in 1912, then, we are up to the property being sold to George and Irene Ray Snyder Sauble. And I believe they had small children when they moved there. And the restaurant actually did not start until 1918. So this is 1912. Why do you think your grandparents started the restaurant?
They wanted something to do with all the rooms that they had. There were 8 on one level and 6 on the other. And some of the farm hands lived in some of the rooms. And they decided to do something with them, so they advertised in newspapers in the Baltimore area. And as a result, they had people coming from the Baltimore and Washington area in order to spend the night and so forth. And that seems to be how it got started. And then when people came to visit the people that were staying there, they asked my grandmother and her family would they serve them meals. And so they were serving meals to the roomers or boarders and to their company, company coming to visit. So from that point on, then they started with Sunday dinners in order to accommodate them, and other people wanted to come too that knew them. So it just kind of picked up in that sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
But my grandparents had 6 children. My father, Norman, was the oldest, and he was born in January the 19th in 1900.
So he was only 12 when they moved there.
Yes, he was. And then came Earl Sauble, who lived to be 18. He drowned in a rowboat activity on the Monocacy just across the Frederick County line. And then came my Uncle Raymond in 1905. He lived to be 40. He happened to have a car accident. He apparently didn't make the turn coming down the same road along Monocacy where my other uncle, whom I didn't know, was killed. So, and Uncle Raymond was 40 at the time, and I think he died in 1946. Then came another child, Ernest, who died at birth. And then my Aunt Ethel, who thank goodness did live, and she was born in 1910 and died in 1999. Then came another stillbirth, my Aunt Emma, and this was in 1913. So altogether, my grandparents had the 6 children. Only 4 actually made it. Eventually, my parents, when they married, a house was built across the street, just two driveways down from the main entrance to our Taneytown Memorial Park. And my Uncle Raymond and his wife built a house right next to the Park Drive, and then my parents built first. It was back, I think, about 1926, possibly a little before that. They built each built a dark brick house. My father had 2 daughters. My sister was born 2 years ahead of me, and Aunt Ruth and Uncle Raymond had 3 children, George, Ed, and Lorraine. My sister was 50 when she died, scuba diving in the waters off the coast of Mexico. She became a hospital dietitian at Duke University Hospital and married he was at first a student and then a surgeon. And 6 of them, upon graduating and wanting to go into business, decided to move to Arizona, and they decided to go to the waters off the coast of Mexico and scuba dive, and seeing a unusually large moray eel, she went and grasped, and the water came in and she drowned. But and my brother-in-law, her husband, just died about a year ago, a little over a year ago. With Aunt Ruth and Uncle Raymond, they had 3 children, George, Ed, and Lorraine. And my sister and I and those 3 were as close as could be. We practically lived in each other's houses. My sister was 2 years older than I. George was about 4 months younger than me. And then Ed came along 3 years after that, and Lorraine about 3 to 4 years after that. So we just fit the age. Aunt Ethel's children weren't in the area. She married a man, Uncle Eddie, who became a minister, and they lived in the Pennsylvania area, several hours. I think it was about 3 or 4 hour drive, but we went to visit every once in a while. But they weren't back here until many, many years after that. But we just had a nice time. When they were taking what we call boarders or roomers over at the inn, they got so many they didn't have room enough for all of them. So they asked my parents to take one or two. So they farmed out 2 of their bedrooms, and my sister and I slept on piles of rugs and blankets on the floor in the back part of the dining room. And then when they needed still more, they went over to Aunt Ruth and Uncle Raymond next door. And Lorraine slept on a cot then in her parents' bedroom. And George and Ed were given the privilege of our back porches. Both back porches of our houses had a roof on it, but ours had poles up and a roof on top of that. George and Ed's didn't, but Uncle Raymond finished it off and made it into a room so that in the summertime, George and Ed would sleep in the room over the back porch. And so they were able to take in more. It was just, well, something you did. Well then, unfortunately for the roomers, or perhaps fortunately, I don't know, us 5 kids playing together, those that were staying there, now they didn't eat at our house, they still went over to the inn to eat, but they would sit on the front porch and talk to us and so forth, and then when we were out back playing together at each other's houses and so forth, they'd come around back and sit on the lawn chairs my family provided, and we'd entertain. Well, then my father, the dear soul, built a platform. It was about that high off the ground, and it was painted dark green. I'd say it was 6 to 8 feet square, and it was open on 3 sides. The back side, behind the stage, had part of a wall, and it had a doorway opening that actually had a pointed frame up at the top that you could walk through this doorway. It didn't have a door on it, but the rest of the back part we could stand behind till we were ready to come out. We'd get on that thing and read poems, sing songs, do dances, and they would, the boarders would sit there and clap their hands for us. Well, of course, that made us feel good. And I recall every now and then we'd be thrown pennies and nickels and so forth.
Wow.
And it was just fun. But when it came to working time, now all the work that we did for our grandparents, we were never paid for in dollars and cents, but we learned a lot. And every Monday we could count on having backs and necks fried chicken at our house, maybe some leftover mashed potatoes or sweet potatoes or candied apples or some things like that. So every Monday was leftovers from Saubles Inn, and we all enjoyed it. My grandparents had us doing other things too, only because we wanted to, not because we were forced to. But the field that we picked potatoes, the 5 of us, now Lorraine was much younger, and she didn't do as much of this, but she was there most of the time and saw what was going on.
The potato field was across the road, over here, across from the house?
No, it would be right here.
Up in
Right
this area?
here.
Okay.
This would be the Harney Road,
Yes.
you know. And when we picked potatoes, they had hired help galore, they really did. And we'd fill the baskets, and then the hired help would lift them up on the wagon, or, you know. But when we came across small potatoes, as Lorraine still says, remember, George and Ed used to throw the small ones at us 3 girls, and I said, I sure do. I mean, we had to pick them up anyhow and put them back in the basket. But that's one thing they like to do. Another thing that we did, we picked dandelions. Now that may sound funny, but my grandmother used them to make wine. And I can still see them sitting in those huge tubs with some moisture and these yellow dandelions, and they were just fermenting and so forth. But she used it in her mince pies and fruit cake and things like that.
Well, did they sell liquor to the restaurant goers?
No,
or
we
they
had
didn't
coffee
serve this wine, the standing
coffee,
wine?
water, and iced tea, yes. And a big part of this dining room was this additional building there, which is now turned, ages ago, was turned into a regular full apartment. Some of the other things out back here, there was gardens going up the walk here. We helped with all kinds of things in those gardens. I mean, all the food that they served.
You have a list of food?
Yes.
It was a lot.
They started out originally costing 75 cents, and by the time they were ready to close, I can still see Grandma standing there. We just can't charge $3. They were up to $2.75. She and Uncle Raymond and my mother and Aunt Ruth were standing at the entrance to the small dining room talking about this. We're going to have to close. We just can't charge that much for a meal. This is what they were serving. Fried chicken, all of this was all that you could eat. And they had fried ham or chicken livers if you requested it. And for Thanksgiving and Christmas, they had turkey and dressing too. But they also served mashed potatoes and gravy, candied sweet potatoes, candied apples, corn, peas, lima beans, asparagus, sliced tomatoes, coleslaw, cottage cheese, chow chow, chicken salad, fruit salad, celery, apple butter, strawberry preserves, rolls and butter, coffee and iced tea, angel food cake, marble cake with chocolate icing and black walnuts on top. And they had homemade ice cream of chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and when peaches were in season, peach ice cream was also served.
Sounds wonderful.
And all of those things had to be put on trays, you know, dipped up and put on trays and so forth. And I mean, it was just big trays. As a matter of fact, I still have a couple of the trays. And one of their big pitchers, it looked like it might hold maybe 2 gallons of water. And they had little glass pitchers that for the small tables, they could just fill that with water and put it on the table for the people to help themselves too, you know. And on the table, they used cloth, tablecloths in the beginning until they got into such a business. Then they used plastic, but it was like an engraved plastic material with felt backing. And then we had to wash them each time the patrons changed, you know, the different patrons came to the table. But there were just, well, so many of the people kept coming back that they eventually got to going to the same waitress, you know.
They had their favorites.
Apparently so. I can't tell you how old my sister and I were when we started waitressing in the dining room, but we were busy in the kitchen until we became old enough to work in the dining room. And in the kitchen they had 3 cold storage rooms. The wall between the kitchen and the dining room had little sliding doors that went up that you could, I don't know, maybe about this square, a bit wider, I guess, that you could raise the door and talk to them and say, I need this or I need that. One of them went right into the dishwasher, which was like it was on a ramp, and it went up and they cleaned off the dishes, and people on the other side cleaned off the dishes and then put them on these racks and sent them through this moving dishwasher rack, and they came out the other end. And dear Lorraine, who was the youngest of us all, she was so short that she was drying the silverware on days that we were real busy. The other things could self-dry because they were so hot and everything. And the silverware could too, but not fast enough. and it was so hot that Lorraine couldn't handle it, so she'd grab them with one towel and dry them off with another towel and put them on a tray or a container to send them over to the dining room people to use. And I mean, I can still see her standing on that stool, just this little kid leaning over to get them and so forth. The other windows, we could get regular dishes, not just silverware. If we had some hot food that we needed to refill, that would come out of another opening. And then there was a section where the ice cream was stored. It was made out in one part of the shed going up here, and then brought in large, tall cans like that, and put in a refrigerated container open to the dining room. And we could dip the ice cream, whatever kind, they chose to use. And then the last one was the cold storage room where the George and Elwood Frame. They lived in Greenville at the time. They were maybe 2 to 4 years older than my sister and I, but we knew them. They were family friends and everything. So. And they were in a cold storage room that had wooden racks on each side when you went in from the kitchen. It was full-length door, of course. And they worked in there to dip up what we needed. And before we were old enough to work in the dining room, whoever worked in there, we had to take them dishes. There were a lot of glass dishes being used, of course, for that area. It was just, it was fascinating.
And I guess they cooked on an old wood stove.
Well, the chickens were fried in old wooden cast iron stove, and used cast iron, big black cast iron frying pans like that in lard. The Mother's Day Sunday that we had 1,000 people. We didn't know until we counted at the end, or they counted at the end of the day. But the stoves were at the Gettysburg end of the kitchen. And they got so hot that the wood that was stored on the other side of the wall to use in the stoves started smoldering and caught on fire.
Oh my.
But they put it out and everybody kept on going. It was just fascinating. It really was.
Now, you told us some about they grew a lot of vegetables in the gardens.
They
And
grew
what about the animals?
everything that they could for themselves. That was the least expensive, and it was right there. And they had a lot of helpers. Some of them even lived at the inn. I can recall when this house was built. No, excuse me. This house was built. Now, my grandparents owned those 2 houses too, but this house was built for one of their workers. And the layout of that house is exactly the layout of the brick house that I was born in ages ago. They raised their own chickens. Let's see. This was the chicken house here. Cement block at the bottom, wood at the top, and they raised hogs down there. That was just removed last year by the Aunt Ethel's daughter's family. Of course, they butchered the hogs, and upstairs they butchered the chickens. And George, Ed, and eventually Lorraine, of course my sister, my mother, and Aunt Ruth, and Uncle Raymond all assisted along with other people, the helpers and so forth, in killing the chickens. And I can recall George was so tickled when he was considered old enough, and Uncle Raymond would get a chicken out of a crate and hold it for him, and he'd take it and hold it so that his neck was on a chopping block, and then George would chop it, and the neck would fall down, and he'd put the chicken, wiggling and everything else, in a tall bushel basket, not the short round, but the tall, and it would flop and flop until it was gone. And then either Uncle Raymond or one of the hired helpers would put it against a machine that had thick rubber fingers and rotate it, and that would help to remove the feathers. And then someone else would have to finish it up. And it would be cut open so that the insides could come out. And in the beginning, I thought it was fantastic. I was first in line to do something, but that was gizzard patrol. And I had to clean out the gizzard, cut it open. And I did, but I was so tickled when I was considered old enough and good enough that I could actually cut out the wings. And what you did, it was just like a conveyor belt. Each person did one thing and passed the chicken along to the next. And you put your item on a tray in front of you, or in a bowl in front of you, which is what I did with the gizzards. And then when I was finally able to cut the chicken wings off, I could do that and put them in.
You were promoted.
I was definitely promoted. You have no idea how that made me feel. Stupid situation as it was. I thought it was great that I was considered good enough to go to the next item. But my mother and my Aunt Ruth, and of course a lot of helpers, and we all that was something we did. So.
Did you have fruit trees? Your own fruit?
They had some, but not nearly what they needed, of course. But they did have a lot. And we needed a particular kind of apple for the candied apples. York Imperial were the ones that I think my grandparents used.
And did you make applesauce?
Made applesauce and, of course, candied apples. And they had a piece of equipment that would clamp onto the tables, the big tables they had back in the kitchen. And it had a handle on it, and it had a part that would have like teeth that you'd stick the apple on and then turn, put the blade against it and then turn, and it would peel the apple. And then when you take it off and put it in a bowl, and someone else would take it and cut it into the chunks that it was needed, And the candied apples and candied sweet potatoes were most often cooked by Maggie Aller, who was a good old standard, delightful hard worker, on a gas stove in an offside section of the kitchen. It was along with burners on top. I don't know, possibly 3 or 4 burners in a length, and these big pans would sit there. Very little water in the ones that did the candy apples, but lots of butter, of course. And of course, sugar galore, all that. But it came out beautifully. We had a good time with it, so.
And with the pigs that they grew, they had the hams.
Yes.
And then the lard.
Mm-hmm. Well, they had a smokehouse in the back of the building. Yeah. It would have been out in this area someplace. It's no longer there, of course, but it was larger than an individual car garage. And half of it was a smokehouse part. And you go in and there would be these hams and so forth hanging from the rafters, smoking and everything. And then the other half was used as a laundry room and for storage of other things. Grandma, of course, did she and the help of the laundry. And of course, sheets and everything had to be washed. And they were hung on the line. And in the back of the house here, and the walks are still there. I don't know if you can even see. Yes, you can. And there are clotheslines on each side. And those walks were also handy when you were walking down through the garden to pick things, the tomatoes or whatever. They just were handy. Now, people that stayed there overnight or for the week or something, they had someone else. Well, as a matter of fact, we were fortunate that Miss Carrie Winters and her parents, Herbert, Mr. and Mrs. Herbert Winters, that lived about a half a dozen houses up the street, almost across where were the Dean Automotive's garages now. They did the laundry. They came down and picked it up from the people and then took it home and did it and brought it back to them. All members of our Sauble family went to the Trinity Lutheran Church, which is still exists, and I still go to here in Taneytown. And among other things, we had a Sunday school superintendent, and many of the times we would meet in the large Sunday school room and with the adults, and the smaller Sunday school rooms off to the side. We'd meet in groups around the room and so forth. But, and once in a while from the pulpit upstairs, we would be told about how terrible it was to work on Sunday.
Oh my.
And unfortunately, everybody knew that Saubles Inn was working on Sunday. And this man, the farmhouse, had a beautiful big brick farmhouse outside of Taneytown. And all too often, when he began his introduction or was talking before teachers went to their, divided into their individual groups in this big room, he would mention that fact. And the irony of it is, I can't tell you exactly when, it wasn't right away, of course, but before the inn closed, the man had 3 very lovely daughters, and 2 of them came to work at Saubles Inn on Sunday. And it was just the irony of the whole thing, that the man who really did the most talking about this working on Sunday ended up with his daughters there. We all wore, well, uniforms. We had dresses made by a lady over in Kemar, and we'd go over to be fitted and so forth.
All the waitresses?
All the waitresses had those. The fellows that worked there didn't have anything special, but they always looked nice. And thank goodness we had them to carry our heavier trays and help to clear tables and things like that. But it was just, I can still see my Uncle Raymond and my mother and aunt and another one or so standing by that door near the front of the house saying that we simply can't go on to charge this much money.
Well, I think that this porch is so beautiful. It's a big porch that I think your grandparents added to it.
Well, they had small porch roof over each doorway, but they didn't like that. And of course with
There were
people,
3 of those.
3 of those. So they decided to make it a porch that covered 2 sides, the 140 Road side and the Harney Road side. And would you believe, just last year, among other times, of course, but Aunt Ethel's daughter, who, well, she's no longer existing, but Sandra died a couple years ago from Parkinson's. But her husband and family still tended the grounds, and they had everything gone over and replaced the roof and did all this stuff wherever they needed. And it looks like the same identical place. They made a point of returning everything to the order it was.
Oh, how
and so
wonderful.
it looks just like it did.
Oh,
Same tone of green, everything. The
Great.
only thing, well, the porch was tiled years and years ago, you know, but and they have automatic lights that at night, if you're walking on the porch, they turn on in sections on the ceiling, you know, and it's just fascinating how everything's been updated.
Very
And
nice.
this house was built by Aunt Ethel and my uncle Eddie when they retired from the ministry and moved there. And of course they still, Sandra's family still owns that too. But it's just, well, it's fascinating.
Well, speaking of the big porch, I can just imagine how nice that would have been for guests who came in the summer to sit out there.
Oh, they did, they did.
And do you remember some of the special guests, any special guests that you remember that stayed there?
Well, Miss Carrie and Miss Rose were the main ones, only because of the imprint that they gave on me. And there were others, but it may be the 89-year-old brain. I can't recall specific names other than those 2, you know. But, and of course they sat on the lawn too. As a matter of fact, I had 2 of their lawn chairs until about, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. I no longer, since I'm alone, my husband's been dead for uh, 29 years in July. And I don't like to sit out on the side porch out of my house by myself, so I don't use them. And I gave them to one to my daughter and one to my son. And so they use them. But they were metal chairs with armrests, and usually they were green. As a matter of fact, there used to be one up on the, what used to be the Reformed Church Parsonage, where Reverend Brady lived years ago when he was minister over at the Reformed Church. And I was going to get up enough courage to go up and ask if they wanted to sell it, but the time I thought about it and actually did something, they had moved and took the chairs with them, apparently. But they were very, very comfortable, and the people would carry them off the porch if they wanted to sit out in the open. Otherwise, they would line the porch, and Uncle Raymond would stick his head out the door and say, the Slayball family, or this family, or, party of two, party of four.
Oh, they were waiting to get in.
Yes.
A waiting line.
They had gone in and made, paid for the reservations and everything, and then when the tables were ready, they'd be called in. So it was.
And do you have any stories about the ladies that came and stayed for a while in the summer? A story about that was some teachers came up in the summer and stayed.
Well, the Miss Carey and Miss Rose were retired school teachers from the Baltimore area, and they they were nice. I don't know.
The way one of them was dressed?
Oh, the way she was dressed. When I took mail to her room one evening, those were chores we did as little kids, And when she opened that door, I knocked on the door and I said, "Miss Carey, mail." She opened the door and she was in this long white nightgown with ruffles around the neck, long sleeves with ruffles, and a white cap with ruffles around it. And she had reddish hair. It was very pretty. It was thin. It wasn't bushy or anything. And she kept her hand on the doorknob and stuck her other hand out to get the mail. And she said, "Thank you." And it was such a shock the first time I saw her. After that, I expected it, and that's the way she looked, unless I was able to go earlier, whenever my grandmother had time to sort out the mail for whomever was to get it, And now Miss Rose was dressed very much the same way, but she never had the cap on that I saw. And she had so much dark black hair that looking back now, all these years, I'm wondering if maybe it was a kind of wig. The way it seemed, I don't know. I certainly didn't know at the time or didn't think about it then. But no, there were people that, husband and wife, I can recall. I can't recall the name, but they even asked to come to our house to stay because of us.
Oh.
Because George and Lorraine and my sister and I, we just played together at each other's houses as if we lived in those houses,
They came because of the entertainment.
Well, apparently so, but it was fascinating.
Do you have any other memories that you think you might have not told us today?
Well,
if not, my next question will be, why do you think your grandparents decided to close the inn? It was 1943, so we're talking war times.
My grandfather died in 47.
So he only lived 4 years after they closed.
My grandmother lived until 54.
So they were getting older.
Oh yes, and that was also part of the reason of not wanting to raise the cost of the meal. And I can still see Grandpa standing there. He frequently kept one hand in his pocket for some reason or other. That's just the way he was. But it took my grandmother a while. Of course, she was very lonely losing my grandfather. My father used to walk over almost every evening just to visit for a few minutes and then walk back, just checking on Grandma.
She stayed there until she died in the house.
She had a big old leather chair that my grandfather used to use, The room that was right inside the very front door, what was on the other side of the, over on this side, the Harney Road side, he had a big old leather chair that he used to sit in and look out the window toward Taneytown. And she took up that position when my grandfather died. And when you rode by, those of us who knew the situation, we'd go slow enough and we'd see Grandma in there, you know. But then she got up and she did her things, you know, but it was...
So probably a combination of the food prices going up and war times
And
their age
yes, yes.
caused them to close in 1943.
Mhm.
So they really were open for 25 years.
Yes,
So that
yes,
was a long
yes.
time.
And
Long hours, I'm sure.
George and my sister and I were in high school at the time, and Ed and Lorraine were in elementary school.
Okay.
And I mean, it was just different, but I can still see us playing together in the grassy area between our two houses. We were just like one family in each house, you know what I mean? And that's just the way it was at the time.
Well, your parents' names were Norman
And
Beulah.
Beulah. Shoemaker Sauble. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We should say their names. And also, your grandparents and your parents and the whole family did a lot for the Taneytown community. And one of the biggest things, maybe, was they sold probably about 40 acres off which is on the across the road, for the Memorial Park, which has been enjoyed now for generations.
Yes, yes, it certainly has.
A wonderful park for use for ball games and
Well,
picnics.
in the back of my house property, the other side of my split rail fence is Taneytown Memorial Park.
Mhm.
You know.
So that whole section did belong to the Sauble farm. So they sold it off
We
for
could
the...
go clear up to where Dean's Automotive garage is now and sled down the hill.
Oh, that
When
sounds
there was
great.
enough snow, we could do that.
Uh-huh,
And
that
then that
sounds
was all
great.
sold off to building it.
So many people have enjoyed that park that came off the Sauble farm. The
Yeah.
park was dedicated in 1953. And actually, we think that this picture, excuse me, this picture probably was in the 1950s
Oh, I suppose it was. Yes.
and maybe around early 1950s is the age of this picture. So actually, when this picture was taken, it really wasn't in any longer, but it hadn't changed much.
No.
Still,
No,
by that
it
time.
really hadn't.
Your family owned the Opera House and took care of that for some years. Your family was active in community groups such as the Lions Club, I think, and
Yes,
church.
Yes.
So they did really give a lot back to
Well,
the
the
community.
Kiwanis Club did start to meet there on Wednesdays.
At the inn,
The Lions Club hadn't been formed then yet, but they did,
in
and
the early 40s maybe, before it closed,
yes, oh yes.
maybe 30s,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Louella, and we certainly thank you for coming and sharing
Oh,
all your memories.
it was
We-
just a fun way to grow up. And
Sounds like it.
I mean, people have said that, well, didn't you get paid? We were paid in just being there.
Enjoyed it.
And to grow up with the three cousins next door. And Lorraine and I are still, of course, alive. And in Aunt Ethel's family, she has Ronnie, I think, is in the Annapolis area. I haven't heard her talk to him for many years. And Judy, I'm not sure, I think maybe in the New Jersey area, but there again, I'm not sure. But it's just been, well, can't complain. It's been a wonderful life so far.
Well, we thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you for having me.